Gonna take a minute.
I see Phil in with the attendees.
Okay, I'll get him in 1 minute.
Okay. He's got his hand up.
Can I promote him? I can. I did it.
Okay, great.
There we go.
All right, we should be all set.
I don't see him yet, but
I clicked the button. There he
There he
is. All right. Welcome to the Monday, February 8th, 2021 meeting of the Dennis-Yarmouth Regional School Committee. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. We begin the meeting tonight with a public hearing on the budget, which starts with a presentation, and then we will take public comment. So take it away, Mr. Jenks.
Good evening. Tonight, as we work our way through the budget, hang on, boss.
Did we lose Ken, or is he just?
no, he's here. He's
paused?
just trying to get back to the first slide.
Oh, okay. No worries.
I can't get back into the main screen. Can't get back to my mute or share.
Oh. All right, well, let's see.
Can you unmute me?
Oh, wait a minute, Ken. Here you go. Try that. I said all panelists, so you try to see if you can.
Thank you and good evening. As we look through our budget this evening, this is the tentative budget voted by the committee, and it was voted about a week and a half ago. And it's always important, I think, to look at a budget is what are you trying to accomplish first? Who is it you're trying to serve? And so our initial slides are really about who's in our schools, and then we'll build on that of what we think is the best programming for those students' needs, and then how do we work with the available revenue in our communities to make sure we provide the programs that are necessary. And then we'll be talking a little bit about the next steps in the process.
Recently, we talked a little bit about our demographics. And as you can notice from the percentage of various categories in our district, we are currently at about 35% of our district being people of color. And so as we go forward in thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, this is an important piece. And I brought this up to the committee during my presentation on the Student Opportunity Act funds. And it is something that we are keenly aware of and paying attention to in terms of making sure that we provide an equitable education to all students. Slide. We also often talk about our selected populations. This is one of the things that the DESE wanted us to talk about in our Student Opportunity Act, was how would our work in using the Student Opportunity Act money help to improve the education of some of our selected populations. Most of you know, if you've been around the school committee meetings for a while, that high needs students are a combination of students with disabilities, economically disadvantaged, and English language learners. So when you take students that have one or more of those, belong to one or more of those categories, they fall into the high needs category. And you can see that we're just a little over 60% in high needs. Also, when it comes to economically disadvantaged, as I often say when I do these budget presentations, poverty is one thing, but sometimes what we've learned in education is that when students are economically disadvantaged, sometimes they have some gaps in their learning. And so part of our role as a public education is to fill in those gaps. But sometimes that takes resources. Not always, but sometimes it does. And so that's a piece when we're talking about our budget that's really important to us. Okay, next slide. This was another kind of interesting slide. I want to draw your attention to the two-year public college. Right now, I think we have about 24 students this semester that are doing dual enrollment at Cape Cod Community College, which all of you must know that if students take some college credits while they're still in high school, that sometimes helps to reduce the cost of their college education. So that's a really very effective approach for us. The Cape Cod Community College is a little bit like a diamond in the rough, I think. Sometimes people don't think of sometimes two-year public colleges as being that important, but they're very important. And they're especially important to a district with a high level of economically disadvantaged students, because it often is a way for students to still live at home, to take a few college courses, maybe to get the two-year degree and then move on later to finishing a four-year degree. So it's not unusual, I don't think, that a lot of our students do decide to take on the two-year public college education to begin with. I think we want to draw attention to the fact that when it comes to college and it comes to post-secondary, you can see that over 82% of our students go on to some other education after high school. And I think that is really remarkable for some of the challenges that our students face. In addition, as you can see, and it's something that we've been really focused on, as we did when we were talking to you about the Student Opportunity Act, 28% of our juniors and seniors last year took one or more advanced placement college level courses. Again, students do well on college, on the advanced placement exams. They often earn college credit, and that also is a way to save money. So even though you're only going to school, some of the things that you can do while you're in high school can help to save you some money in the long run. Okay, next slide.
In terms of our budget, the timeline, the committee has seen many of these slides several times already this year, but you can see the timeline. This is our public hearing evening. And the big work, if you will, in the budget often happens over the next 6 to 7 weeks. In theory, in a month from now, you're adopting a final budget. And again, if past history is any consideration, that final budget continues to evolve often into the month of May until we get, into April, until we go to that first town meeting and we move on from there. Because often as time goes by, we get more information about revenue or adjustments in the budget in previous years, retirements, and it allows us to refine our budget and make changes. And that makes it, we can preserve the education, but also it's a viable budget for our two towns. Because we know at the end of the day, all three of those things matter. Fiscal viability for two different towns and educational viability for what we do as a committee. And it's finding the right balance in those places that's important. And again, this year, as people are aware, the governor's budget, we're waiting for that. And it seemed to take a little longer than usual, but it came out and now we have the information we need to start the budget process in a serious way. As I get a little deeper into the presentation, we'll talk about some other options that are starting to flow from either the state or the federal government to make sure that schools and communities can do the things they need to do. And I think that's an important when we look at revenue. Our budget, how do we divide our budget? Well, simple. The regional agreement is the controlling document. Lots of evolution in that document, changes a while back after many years of work by multiple people. And we use a 5-year foundation rolling average, and you can see those listed there in the green. We actually started last year with 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. This cycle is those, and then the next year we'll move forward again and start with the next piece in the cycle. You can see the 5-year rolling average for Dennis, it'll be 32,9166, and Yarmouth 67,0834. And you can see the previous year's numbers down below. A little less for Dennis, a little more for Yarmouth. And roughly speaking, that's that range. Yarmouth is approximately 2/3 of the district, and Dennis has been approximately 1/3 on and off during various time periods as you look at that. State just released foundation numbers for FY22, our FY22 budget, about a week ago. And interestingly, it's 3,140 students. That's a fairly large drop from the previous years. You can see that 3,338. And I think part of it's attributable to significant numbers of people homeschooling this year because of COVID. Across the state, there's a real different change in some of the numbers. And so more on that as things unfold, but for all practical purposes, we use that 5-year foundation rolling average based on the years in question. So that's the breakdown for the FY22 budget.
If I could add in, one of the things that is important to this slide in particular, and sometimes people wonder why we wait so long to do our budget. One of the things that we wait for is, in terms of the governor's numbers that he puts forward, is for that minimum required contribution. And that's an important piece to understand. Minimum means it's the minimum required contribution that the two towns are required by the state to give to the district to support education. We're very fortunate here at Dennis-Yarmouth. Our two towns give more than the minimum required contribution. And that is why we're able to have many of the things that we do have, such as marching band, some of the sports that we have, all our art programs, resources that our kids need, like social workers and people like that. And so what people often confuse is that the very first thing that gets subtracted from the total budget in terms of revenue is the required minimum contribution. And after that, whatever is left over gets divided by this 5-year rolling average now, as stated in the regional agreement. And that's why this piece is so important to us. And I thought, since we have a few new people, I'd just point that out. We can talk about that at another point also. Thank you.
In terms of what we've done this year and then what we plan on for next year, again, it's very important to emphasize for people in the community, there aren't a great many school systems that have 80% plus of their K-7 students attending school on site. Now that means there's 20% found them at home doing remote. And for what it's worth, in the future, I'm not sure we're ever going to go back to this model where suddenly everybody goes back to school buildings. I think this is here to stay for the future, but that's a different discussion perhaps for another time. Now, in order to prepare for that, there was significant amounts of money we had to expend on personal protective equipment, PPE, additional cleaning crew, staff hours to come in because we wanted to make sure at all times people felt comfortable that the buildings were being cleaned and disinfected. And last year when we went out for remote, and in a way that many of us had not planned for because nobody really saw that coming, one of the major investments we made were iPads. So all students would have some kind of technology. So if they are at home, if they are remote, they are able to work with the school program and stay current with things that are going on. Most of those items came through grants, and we will be doing the same, hopefully in FY22, that any of those pieces of equipment or any of those extra additional pieces of cleaning or some occasional PPE we need to purchase, that we anticipate will come from grants. So we will not have to use any local funds for that. The biggest challenge, of course, was the additional staff required by the 6-foot rule and then limitations on how many students you can have in a classroom. More on that later, but this is an update, again, mostly for people who perhaps at home aren't familiar with what we've been able to accomplish in the schools or what we're doing in the school systems on a daily basis. Revenue now, when we start to look at, we are creating a budget. This is what we are trying to, this is the population we're serving. This is what we've done. So what is it we need when we start looking at building that budget? We know how many classrooms in general we're going to need. Normal years, this year, however, is it going to be a 3-foot rule or a 6-foot rule? And we look at the available revenues and a little bit of a conundrum. In the FY21 column, you'll note, I listed last year when we ended, excuse me, when we ended with the conference committee number there, that's actually higher than the number we started with this year. And I just wanted to put that little piece, you can see conference committee down there, and then FY22, the governor's budget. Now, the reality is when they issued the FY22 cherry sheets, they were no longer using that FY21 conference committee number. But I didn't want to leave that out there because when you look at your FY22 cherry sheet, it looks like there's been a slight, a jump up for us compared to what they were predicting earlier in the year. And when you look at FY21 and the cherry, FY22 and what the cherry sheet was proposing for us, when it's all said and done, when you add all the revenue and subtract all the charges, the net change for us is that $26,854. And so from the point of view of state revenue, and I think most of us were anticipating this, the state was hit hard for their revenue by COVID, much like our towns, much like everywhere. And so while this was not a surprise, we did not want to make too many budget predictions or adjustments until at least we had this in hand, hence waiting for the governor's budget till just before the last week of January. That's one of our revenue picture pieces. There's some better news coming down the pipeline, I believe. For us, when you look at revenue and we're building the budget, the question has always been, in a sense, how many educators do you need? What logistical support do you need to make those programs work? In the past, we've always been able to say, well, with normal seating arrangements, normal rules, if you will, we could fit X amount of students effectively, safely, efficiently in a classroom space. And this year, the question really is, in September, should we be counting on the more traditional model of one teacher and, to round everything up, 20 students in a room? Or are we still going to be in that place where 2 teachers and 10 students may be required because we're using the 6-foot rule in those pieces in play? And reality is we're waiting for some guidance from the state and the CDC. We've been told it's coming. However, I did not want to bring in an early budget that made an assumption for the committee of one way or the other. And hence that's why we all know that 4.26% increase people see, which is clearly a challenge for everybody to look at. We started that as our baseline because we wanted to ensure if we were using those 6-foot rules, we would have what was needed to open in September and maintain our programming. I think in the next month or so, as we get the guidance, it's supposed to be very soon from CDC and DESE. And I think as we move forward, I'm hopeful we'll be in a different environment and that spacing will no longer be the 6-foot, but certainly that's not something that's been decided at this point in time. And for us to really do the kinds of things we're doing this year, it's a challenge without that additional staff. You look at possible adjustments as time goes on over the next 3-4 weeks as we bring a refined budget to the committee on February 22nd. Staffing levels, again, for the 3-foot distancing, if we were to go there, at least 300,000. I think it may be more, but I never want to overpredict. The limited increase in the health plans. We were hoping and hearing that it was going to be a 0%. And last week they voted for 2.8%, which will still save us some several $100,000 approximately. The real issue, I think, for many schools is going to be the Easter monies, and you can see it, elementary, secondary, emergency relief coming through out of Washington. We're waiting for that to be finalized. I did a webinar, DESE webinar Friday. There's another one tomorrow, and we'll have a really good handle on what we can use those funds for. And are those funds, the initial numbers we're hearing, going to hold firm? And at this point, there's a variety of state and federal grants that schools have traditionally received, as well as that federal money. And once we know what the final figures are, and are those reliable numbers, they're talking of a magnitude that would allow us to close the budget gaps with our communities, to not overwhelm communities, because everywhere you look, regional schools or town schools are all struggling with the same rules. How many students can you fit in a space? How many staff members do you need to make that work? And so hopefully I'll have an update by the end of the day tomorrow. I've reached out to the finance subcommittee to set up a meeting so we can then work through those items. After seeing the initial news, I think, again, we're going to be in a viable place. Not today, because I know our towns look at that 4.26%, and that's not viable. But I think we'll soon be in a place where we can say, we know we're receiving X amount of money. More importantly, here's how we can spend it. It's not just simply buying, say, PPE. There are other opportunities. Does it cover the staffing? And once we have that information, I'm pretty comfortable we'll be able to come to the committee with potential adjustments that keep education happening, but also make it manageable for our communities. The next slide is that slide from the vote on the 25th. And again, DESE budget codes, you've seen this, that was the same as last meeting. I believe you have the 9-page detail handout that, again, we'll go through. And the biggest increase is really about instruction. It's about education and instruction. And some of our placements and payments to other schools, insurance and benefits now, we're looking at, we could make some potential reductions and bring those forward to the committee. But as it stands, that was the breakdown of how the budget is today. And at this point, certainly questions. And this is an environment, sometimes I don't know if it's better for me to we'll record all the questions so we can get answers for everybody, as opposed to responding to many individual speakers. Committees, certainly it's a different place. I've had some preliminary conversation with some folks in the towns, and we know we have other meetings slated for the near future. I feel that, again, as much as I've been saying all year long this year, a little more time, once we know for sure about those Easter monies and what the amounts will be, and are we in a good place with them, I feel we can give people good answers as opposed to simply some sticker shock. But anyway.
All right. Thank you very much. We will start with...
Jenny, we can't hear you.
That's strange. I'm not muted.
I can hear you, Jenny.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Carol,
Okay.
you're the only one who can't hear me.
Oh, okay. Ken must have had his sounds turned down, and yours turned up again.
I'll turn my sound up now. Yeah.
There we go. Awesome. All right. And you'll keep the slides up. I imagine people will want you to scroll through them a little bit if possible when they have their questions. Okay. All right. So we're going to start with comments and questions from the public. I mean, it's mostly, well, comments from the public. Ken, I'm sure will answer questions as he can if there are easy answers to this. Otherwise, he'll get back to people. So I just have to get to my participants list here. First will be Heidi Ames, please.
You want me to hit it?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I am a 4th grade teacher at Wixon, and I was just wondering, I found it interesting that Mr. Jenks said that, you know, he feels that we probably will be in some form of this kind of learning where some people are remote and some people are in school for some time. And so with that being said, I am hoping that perhaps some consideration could be given at Wixon, where I teach, to funding some additional classroom teachers. And the reason I bring this to your attention is that Wixon is the only K-7 school where the special needs teachers this year are also homeroom or classroom teachers. So that makes it very challenging for them to meet all of the needs of their special needs students on their IEPs, because essentially they are having two roles at the same time. I do share students with one of these teachers this year, and we do have a special needs cohort. And so we continue to be very concerned and have voiced this concern in many places, that it's very difficult to make sure that all of the needs of those students are being met, because it's not like last year where those teachers had one job, and that was to service those particular children on their caseloads. So my primary concern always is for the children that we teach, and wanting to be sure that we can meet all of their needs. And it would be easier to do that if, you know, the special needs teachers could have that one particular job that they've always done. And also it would just secondarily, it would also be easier for them because they wouldn't be juggling all of their responsibilities, testing children, writing IEPs, et cetera, along with balancing the needs of the children the same way that I am. So I just hope that that consideration will be considered next year, particularly for the Wixon school, because that's the only school where that particular situation is in play. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I should have said this before Heidi Ames spoke, but it's going to be 3 minutes per person, and that was just 2.5 minutes. So we will move on. Next is Vina Morris, please. Ms. Morris, you're.
Oh,
there
I
you are.
think I just unmuted.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So did I understand correctly that Ken, that you said we have 198 fewer students this for the coming year? No, the budget year, in other words, the current year in the schools compared to last year, to cover.
Yes, the foundation enrollment, that's from the state, and approximately 30,000 fewer students across the state. Multiple school systems have noticed, you know, traditionally we drop about 50 to 60 students. This is right now almost 200. The one concern we have before we jump to any far-reaching conclusions, if we used to have, say, about 30-ish homeschool students, and now we're just under 100. That's something that jumped so dramatically. We made some connection. We feel it's connected to the pandemic. And once things settle, those numbers may migrate back. Again, not all of them. However, we just wouldn't want to jump to the gun where we'll always be 200 fewer. But yes, the answer is significant drop based on the foundation from the state.
Okay, so that would mean if the number were to stand, that means that we have like 5.9% fewer students than we did last year, and the budget is increasing by 4.26%. This, I mean, we keep having this year after year after year because the enrollments have gone down every single year. And I just, I don't know how you guys can justify with fewer students at such an increase that you couldn't even keep it within the 2.5% is very troubling to me. Now, where in the budget you don't show the utilities as being a separate item, because it seemed to me that we were having constant increases there, and I couldn't understand why we weren't showing a better reflection of the solar arrays in that. But I don't see the utilities being separate. So is that within maintenance or where is it? I don't know.
Yes, that's in the 4,000 series in maintenance. And we print out the 9-page budget piece where you can see some of those subdivisions. So I can get that to people.
No, but the thing is, you know, we're touting about with all of these arrays. And one year when I asked that question, I was told that you reflected some of the monies in the revenue side of the budget. I don't see that this year either in the revenue side.
Well, when we get to the point of making assessments, there is some of that revenue that's reflected in there. You know, for instance, the solar, what that brings in. Without getting into a long involved piece here, some of it's in front of the meter, some of it's behind the meter, some of it's we save directly, and that's revenue. And yet the challenge we're going to always have, and then we'll go from there, is we service the population we have, and as the numbers go down, there's opportunities for saving, but we also see standard increases, and we're about 80 some odd % people in our budget. And we sometimes see the energy costs go up and down. As we all know, they tend to go up, and those pieces are there. We'll keep working at it. As I said, this is the budget brought forward to start the process, and we'll see how this plays out. But I understand your concerns.
The last question I have is that I don't know whether you are scheduled already to go before the Board of Selectmen in Yarmouth, but I assume that you will possibly make some adjustments in the budget as you're presenting it tonight compared to what you will be presenting to the Board of Selectmen. To reflect, I mean, just the health insurance, and that I would like to see why that even happened, even the 2.8% increase, because as I mentioned at the last meeting, I think it was, in his interview, the incoming town administrator, who happens to be on the board of the consortium, said that there would be no increases, that and he's on the board. So I'll be very curious to see what happened there, that even the 2.8% increase occurred. But
Speak for the committee, and I assume, as I would say, though, historically speaking, we've often seen adjustments to the budget over the next 4 to 6 weeks. And I think as we get more information, we may be able to do the same things this year. So, yes.
Well, but you would be possibly making some of those adjustments before you go before the Board of Selectmen?
That's
Well, you're going with today's budget figures. I'm sorry, did you hear me?
Yes, depending on, often I think it's mid-March when we've gone to the selectmen, maybe late March. So again, as we present budgets to the school committee, and then depending on we're invited to see the towns, we were invited to Dennis early this year, and there was conversation. People understood. It was limited from the point of view, there wasn't a lot of information out yet. And it was early in the process. And so again, that I will defer to the committee on their decisions and where they want the superintendent and I to bring the budget.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thanks, Rita.
Next is Marjorie Burke, please.
Hi, good evening. I hope you can hear me.
We can.
Oh, good. Okay. My question I'm asking, not as an employee, but as a parent, that I have concerns at this point right now in my daughter's life, who she's in 8th grade at the high school. And after hearing what Mr. Jenks had shared in terms of not necessarily having an idea of what's going to happen next year with the high school classrooms in terms of, will they still be attending 2 days a week or in having the 3 days, at home. There's a couple things that I'm just asking as a parent for you to consider. Number one, because it's not working in my home with this child. And what I'm asking is, I understand that at this point that you can't necessarily make any recommendations as to what's going to happen next year. But as a parent, I have to take into consideration what is in her best interest and considering going another alternative, because what I've learned definitely is, granted that she's a very healthy child, but in the meantime, her mental health is definitely taking, it's taking a toll on her because she's not in school 5 days a week. So what I'm asking is that as, number one, we're looking at other options for her, whether she go into a private school or not, because she does need to be in a setting for 5 days. Or is there going to be a plan in place within a reasonable amount of time that will enable parents either to make a decision as to what they want to do with their children if we find out that next year, come July or August, that it's going to go back to the 3 days in home and 2 days, in school. And because number one, applications have to be submitted. I don't want to take my child out of the district, but what we've experienced so far is like a half year of like a Spanish course, which technically would have been a full year had she, if under different circumstances. So now she's getting a half year of civics. Those are concerning to me because then she's going to be put into a classroom with a Spanish 2 type of thing, but she's missed a whole half a year because that was how it had to be set up. So what I'm asking of you is there a possibility that there could be a timeline that as a district you can say, you know what, we know that come September, 3rd or whatever, that we were going to go back to what we're doing presently, because it will enable parents to make decisions as to where the proper placement is for their child.
So this public comment period is supposed to be for budget questions.
Well,
So
in retrospect too, what I'm saying is like, are you considering in any other ways, like getting pods or something like that? Or
well, this isn't the right time for that conversation, unfortunately. This time is set aside for questions about the budget, and I understand that you have questions about remote learning, and Carol Woodbury can give a brief answer at this time, but I really need to reserve this time for budget questions. There's public comment at the end, and also we always encourage people who have complicated or different or personal situations to bring them to the right people to get them resolved. But I will ask Carol to briefly respond to that, but we need to get back to the budget questions, please.
Well, I guess my question then is the budget going to adjust to kids that need to be in school 5 days a week? That's my question.
Okay, Carol, do you want to respond to that?
I think we have an option for that now. We've, one of the things that I was going to report on tonight is the fact that, as Mr. Jenks said, we have over 80% of our students in K-7 that are back in person 5 days a week. In the high school, even though we have a hybrid model, 66% of our kids are on any given day in person, which means that it's more than 50%. So we have brought back many students to the high school who needed some extra support or whatever it might be that they needed. Can't speak to individual people's situations here, but I would definitely contact the principal and see if there's a way that you could work out a situation there. And the only thing I can say about next year is it's not going to be like totally a district decision. It'll be the direction of the Department of Education as to whether, and the governor, as to whether or not we can be safely in school with less than 6 feet of distancing. So, you know, that's just something that we can't answer yet. Hopefully we would all have those that information early so that we could get back to whatever kind of in-person education that would be most successful for our students.
So would the budget reflect any types of accommodations to get everyone back into school? Is that, you know, that's the question.
Well, right now, as Mr. Jenks explained, we are trying to determine whether or not we're going to pass a budget or whether we're going to recommend a budget that includes staffing levels for 10 kids in a room or 20 kids in a room or something in the middle. We don't know that yet. You know, we have to wait for state guidance and CDC and DESE, and then we'll know how many kids we can put in a classroom, and then we'll know how many kids we can put in a school, and then we'll know what staffing levels we need, and then we can pass a budget. So unfortunately, it's got a lot of layers, and they all are uncertain right now, unfortunately, and I know that's not a great answer, and so I'm sorry for that.
Okay, I appreciate it though. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Michelle Dunn, please.
Hi, my name is Michelle Dunn. I am a 5th grade teacher at Wixon, president of the DYEA, speaking mostly as an individual. I'd like to also second some of the comments made earlier by Heidi Ames. It is concerning to me that 5 of our special education teachers are trying to function as special education teachers and homeroom teachers. They are knocking themselves out this year and doing the very best job that they can by the kids, but it's just an indisputable fact that the students are not getting as much service and the kind of service that they would get if they had a homeroom teacher, a classroom teacher, and a SPED teacher. And in fact, there's also another situation where that is taking place. We've learned that there are at least 4 teachers at the high school who are special educators who are functioning as content area teachers. They are certified in the area that they're teaching, and I am aware that efforts have been made to reduce their caseload to make things better. But it is definitely a change in practice. In previous years, those teachers would have functioned as co-teachers, and they would have worked with the classroom teachers to support the students on their caseload in that class. So in both of these situations, IEPs were written with the assumption that students would have the benefit of 2 teachers helping them, and that is not happening. And so I realize this is a very preliminary budget with a lot of questions remaining, but I really think it's essential that we structure it in such a way that our SPED teachers can be SPED teachers. The other thing that I find very concerning is, again, I know it's a preliminary budget, but I don't think that there's a plan to add a social worker at the high school. A few years ago, the initial budget was presented cutting all social workers. The community rallied. The community recognized how crucial social workers are to our schools. And through an override, we were able to bring back 5, but we were not able to bring back the high school social worker. And again, this year we do not have a high school social worker. And I believe we have roughly 1,200 kids at the high school. And even before the pandemic, we on Cape Cod were facing tremendous stresses. Our kids live in a part of the state that has one of the highest opioid abuse rates. I believe at one point we were the highest in terms of percentages of babies born addicted. We have a seasonal economy. We have an economy that doesn't provide enough jobs, and we have people that get laid off seasonally. So there was already tremendous financial stress on our families. We have a lot of fractured families. We have a lot of grandparents who are trying to raise, a second generation of children. And then we lump the pandemic on top of that. And our high school kids are old enough and cognizant enough to know when their families are struggling. And so I think the pandemic is putting even more pressure on them. And the fact that they don't have a social worker at the high school to support those kids, I find very troubling. So I hope that moving forward, that will be addressed. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Michelle. Any other members of the public? Oh, I see one. Elena Leppan.
I just want to say, I understand as a teacher all the struggles we are going through, but I also want to say how grateful I am for allowing me to be in class with my students. I mean, there is a huge difference between what I can do as a teacher and what I can do as a teacher in a remote setting. I love my kids. I will protect them. I will keep their masks up. But I am so much more powerful as a teacher if I can be with them in person.
Oh, I think we lost you there. Are you still there? Oh, we've lost your audio.
Okay.
Elena, are you still there?
I'm trying.
Oh, there you are.
Okay. I just wanted to say that I am so grateful for the opportunity to be in class with my students, because it was not able, I was not able to be able to teach all of my students when I was remote. When I am in class with my students, I can reach all of them. And I am just so grateful that we have been able to be in class with my students. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Okay. Would anyone else like to address the committee on the budget? Budget questions, budget comments? All right, seeing none, we will go to comments from the school committee. School committee members, if you want to raise your hands. Joe Tierney.
Thank you, Jenny. I just wanted, before I had a couple of questions about the budget, but I just wanted to just go over a couple of different things. One of the reasons why we're doing hybrid and there's only 60 whatever percent at the high school is because we are doing hybrid. And the reason why we're doing hybrid is because we can't fit everybody in the school at the same time with the social distancing. So, if things change, hopefully by September, things will be better than they are right now. So, hopefully we'll be able to get more kids. You'll have more kids in the classroom. You can put that 20 students to one teacher. So that would be, as Ken showed in the presentation, that would be a reduction in the number of teachers what we need. So, and we'd have everybody back in school. So that's the hope. But again, it's the CDC and DESI's call on that. We're doing a lot better than other districts that are still remote, totally. So, let's see. One of the big the biggest thing is that we want the kids in school. We heard from Mrs. Leppan the fact that she is so happy to have these kids in school in class, and I think I think they're happy to be there, and I think everybody learns better and things like that. So it's our goal as my goal as a committee member, and hopefully as with the administration, is to get as many kids back in the classroom as they can. Again, if we can get that 80 or 90 or 100% of the K through 7 kids and bring that hybrid number back up, that'd be great. But we're kind of tied to where we are now. Ken, one of the questions I had, we talked about the ESSER money.
Yes.
How much we may get? I mean, is there any talk? I haven't really seen a lot out there about, are we going to get $1? Are we going to get $100,000? Are we going to get,
50 cents.
Yeah, I know. I don't know. Is it something that would substantially help us, I guess is the question.
Yes. If it all comes. Is yours up?
No, mine's down.
Okay, we're just coordinating our sound so we don't reverberate. $2 million over 3 years, up to a little more than 2 million. Now, my worry always becomes, I got very excited when I first heard about it, and we all know how this goes. Okay, is that guaranteed? Have they finalized that? What can we spend it on? And I am moderately optimistic. I think, right, there's a sizable amount we'll be able to work with. Once we have a real good knowledge after those webinars, the second one again tomorrow, what are we allowed to use this on? But I think clearly I feel better about looking at our budget, looking at our town partners and saying, okay, we can probably get to a place that's much more manageable for everyone. But it's going to take a little while to work through now. What does that look like? Superintendent myself reviewing some things, presenting it to the finance subcommittee and the committee about, where do you do with that? You don't really, I would argue, necessarily want to spend all of that 1 year, knowing that I think we're in this for the long haul. We might want to say, what's the right distribution and pieces? And it's also the combination. Just before we make a quick commitment, are we going to get some other monies? Because there's talk out of food service kind of money coming out of the federal government in DC and some others. And again, it's all coming together in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So I think, Jody, to answer it, I think it's a good amount that will be helpful for us. The issue now is sorting through what that looks like and getting feedback from the committee on, multi-year, 1 year, because again, I'm not an economist, but I think many of us are worried this is not just going to go away overnight. We'll be challenged for a while.
Okay, thanks.
So if I could say something about that, Joe?
Yep.
Now it's your turn, Ken. One of the things that we have to think about is we have to think of this as pandemic spending.
Right.
And the reason that you have to think about it that way is when the money goes away, well, you have a great big giant hole in your budget that the two towns can't fill. It's much like relying on E&D for those of you who've been on the committee for a while or have been watching from afar. You say, okay, we have $500,000 of E&D this year. Well, let's put in 200,000. What if you don't have $500,000 worth of E&D next year? Where's that 200,000 going to come from? So it's better to back out of your budget the things that are in there that cost money because of the pandemic, because this is going to be like a grant on the side. So you take, like we did this past year, we got a little bit of grant money for technology. So we were like, oh, great, this is awesome. We didn't have to take the money out of the budget. When we had to buy the younger students their iPads, we were able to use some of that money that way, or some of the other ESSER money that came before. We needed to buy PPE, as Ken said, gowns and shields and masks and all that kind of stuff. So we bought it out of the grant if we could. So it's important to do this very carefully so that you're not putting your school budget into something that can't be fixed in the future. And those of you who've been on the committee for a long time know the kinds of things that we've had to deal with in the past by relying on E&D. You create holes for yourself. So we're going to be looking at that very carefully and bringing some recommendations, as Ken said, to the finance subcommittee and also to the full committee eventually, and looking at some line by line review with our finance subcommittee, et cetera.
Thank you. Ken, I just have one other question. You mentioned this $26,000 net revenue increase, I think, in one of your slides. That's just a small shake in the bucket as far as the total budget. That's less than 1%. It's like 0.1% or something like that. So, when we see the 26,000, that's great, but it's not, that's mopping the floor once, kind of thing. So we shouldn't, really rely too much on that. The last question I had is you talked about, and I think Vina mentioned it, the number of students that have gone down this year. Will that number be reflected next year? So when we do that rolling average, a 5-year rolling average, that'll reduce that number. That may change those numbers significantly per town. That's just something to look out for in the future that, that might skew things a little bit, but hopefully it'll go back up the following year. So, so it should even out. But those are my questions. Thank you, Ken and Carol.
Okay, next is Tynan, please.
All right. So I agree with a lot with what has been said, and allocating a little bit more funds to students who need it. And I had several deep conversations with teachers, other students, Dr. Funk at the high school, about the mental health of students. And I've also done my own research on it, and mental health of students really have been exacerbated through the pandemic, because that psychological factor of not being able to communicate in person with other students and other teachers and learn with people in the present. And I do think that we should try to allocate some funds with students. We are doing the best that we can with what we've got. And Dr. Funk has done a phenomenal job at the high school, trying to decrease the stress, canceling finals and everything. But at the same time, that can only go so much. And there are a vast majority of students, because we are in a pretty poverty place in Cape Cod, like other people said, that they need those social workers and that help and that communication, because the guidance department is already stretched incredibly thin, and our psychologist also is also stretched incredibly thin. So maybe we need to look at reallocating funds for students in the mental health area, because that's the most important thing right now in terms of students' health. And also, just a little word in my opinion is, I hear you guys planning what if we don't have the money in the future, but also we kind of have to plan for not the extreme worst case scenario, but near worst case scenario, because let's say, we hope for this, right? But it doesn't go our way. It's better to have, that extra comfort of having, a little bit more money than not at all. And that's just one little thing I'm going to say about that.
Thank you very much. Joe Glenn, please.
I can hear me, Jen?
Yes.
So I actually just want to, because I had questions and because Tynan, Joe, and Carol kind of touched on them, it was good, because what Tynan was just saying, I wanted to ask previously, is that Student Opportunity Act money that would include some of the social workers that we approved, is that going to be in this budget? And that may help answer those questions, but it goes to what Carol was talking about in other grants, in federal grants, that, we get some stuff now, but then we have to eliminate it later. And I understand that. My logic with all of that is, it's kind of like a bird in hand's worth two in the bush. We have it now. And, I understand what Cal was saying about the E&D. My approach, and we have to look at these approaches because we're trying to predict things that are unpredictable, but we have to do it. So even your public comment, people asking questions about staffing variables and things like that, at some point we have to make those decisions, even though we might not have the answer. But going to the E&D and the that money, I've always contained that money was assessed in the previous years, and it rightfully goes. It is the town's money that they've previously assessed, that because we surprisingly budgeted so close, and we got money back from the state that we were deserved, not always what we're supposed to get, such as regional transportation and the like, but we account for that and we make those decisions knowing that we don't know what we're going to get. So that's great budgeting previously, because it's better that we have the money than not have it. But that E&D was already put in the assessments, and if a town did an override, that E&D money that we currently possess really belongs to the town or the towns that assessed it in previous years. Getting to what Joe was saying about the reductions, and I think that goes to retaining people. And so when we make these staffing decisions, we have to think about these parents that might be leaving. But my question in regards to reductions is, when the state gives us these projections or the foundation enrollment, do they break it down by town? In other words, will they know now? Because I know, people come and go late in the season and things like that. But do we know what the town breakdown is in those reductions? Because that changes the assessment for each town, in the next year's budget, not in this upcoming budget. But we will know that, let's say Yarmouth has, of those 200, I have 100 of those students reduced, and Yarmouth's assessment will go down. So my questions have to do with the Student Opportunity Act, whether that is in this budget, whether the state tells us the breakdown of the assessment, and the other public comment about the healthcare. I was going to bring that up because originally in the previous town liaison report, we had left out that the town administrator in Yarmouth was hired, and he did mention that. I wanted to put that in last meeting's report. But the healthcare, the Cape Cod Municipal Healthcare Group, he had said that it was 0%. So I was surprised also that there was that 2.8%. But Ken, when you mentioned that, you said there was an increase, but you said that we would see a reduction. How can there be an increase, but that yet we still see a reduction?
So, if you want, I'll talk about the Student Opportunity Act first.
Right. I think his last question is easily addressed. I think Ken meant a reduction, in the increase.
With the Student Opportunity Act, that's similar to a grant. And as I mentioned, when I presented that, I think there's over $200,000 of it. I think it was $225,000 is set aside for mental health services. So it's not built into this budget because you don't build grants into your budget. If you get the money, you get to do it. If you don't get the money, you don't get to do it. So it doesn't mean there might not be another funding source for it, but that's it. And as far as
Carol, can I just interrupt just quickly?
But the foundation enrollment and the 5-year rolling average that you see there does break it down by the towns, and it's there on the chart. And what was the third thing?
Well, just on that Student Opportunity Act, if
the health plan. Oh, what I was going to say about that is it's very dangerous to go out there before the board votes and make a prediction on how the board is going to vote. Apparently, the board vote was not the 0, it was a 2.8% increase. But Ken, if you have something to add, I'll shut up.
What I originally simply estimated 5% increase. So that kind of, Joe, while it still went up 2.8%, it wasn't the 5%. And that's why
okay, great.
trying to be cautious early on in the budget, and that's why we did the 5.
Yeah, no, I didn't understand that. But to Carol's point about the Student Opportunity Act and these grants, I'm just answering the questions that, were brought up previously about those staffings, that if we have a good feeling that those are gonna, that we're gonna get that grant for the social workers, then we're answering Tynan's questions and the other teachers' questions about how we can budget. We don't necessarily have to put it in the budget because we're anticipating that we're going to get it. Now, we know that we might not get it, but it's just part of our approach because we don't have a lot of the answers, but we have to make some guesses. And that's why I wanted to ask, are we as a committee going to set a tentative date where we have to make the decision and say, okay, these parents and us as a committee, are we going to be able to say, you know what, we don't know from the state. We understand we don't always get answers quick from the state, but we got to make a decision. I tend to agree with you, Ken, that we're going to have this for a long time, but your guess is as good as my guess, as good as anybody else's. So thanks for the answers. I have other questions that that as we go forward, but I just want the public to know that we're looking at everything. We got our sharp pencil, and we're going to do our best. We do have the time constraints, and we will. I saw in the participants that the Yarmouth Finance Director and the Yarmouth Selectman is in the participants, so they're hearing us also. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Grace, our new student representative.
Hi, first I just want to say thank you so much. This is such a fantastic opportunity. I'm so excited to be here. But my main point, circling back around to what Tynan said, is I've been privy to some of the conversations he had, especially with Principal Funk and also with other students who have really been struggling during this time with academics at home, just with themselves. And I understand that the budget is split and pulled in what seems like a million different directions. But I think one of the directions has to be going towards the students, their mental health, and back to like the social workers. I understand that that would be a huge chunk of the budget, but isn't that what we're here for, the students, and what will make the students' lives better? And I think that implementing a social worker where we can, or maybe one that can split time throughout the schools, would be so beneficial to the students and give them an extra resource that they could go to. It's just, there's a lot of kids struggling right now. And again, with what Tynan said, everybody is doing a fantastic job. We've never gone through this before, and we're working with what we have. But now that we have gone through this and we have learned from it, we need to move forward and we need to recognize the main problems. And I think one of the main problems our students are having is with mental health and not having enough places to go to. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. Phil Morris, please. Phil, you need to unmute. Looks like you're unmuted. Phil, are you there? Phil? Phil Morris. All right, we will come back to Phil if he can get audio working. I had a question about one slide that you had that had the committee budget versus the cherry sheet budget, but it was the comparison of 2 different years. And I didn't understand
Conference committee.
Is that, but that's not apples to apples there. Can you explain that slide to me, please?
Sure. The reason I added that is I just wanted to get that picture. I think many towns and schools throughout the state, there's usually 5 columns. You get to the governor's budget, then you do reconciliation type processes, and then usually the revenue for any given year, the final budget from the state side ends with the conference committee numbers. And so this is the first time in quite a while, because I think of the pandemic and how things played. When you looked at the end of FY21, that was the for the projected revenue from the state. Those were the numbers they gave DY. So normally that would be the next set of numbers that starts the FY22 cherry sheet, but they weren't. And so I guess it is a little bit apples to oranges, but I just wanted to capture that feel. It's incredibly rare that we end, one year and then the next year's potential revenue looked lower. So that's why I did it that way. Now, and then the next sheet, that was, I should have probably done the mirror image for the next sheet, the next slide, I mean, to show it. But at the net result is they started the initial cherry sheet for FY22 saying FY21 estimate, and it was a different number. It was a lower number. And so your quote looked like you went up, because I think the state last year at the end toward the end of the fiscal year, they were struggling, as we all know, as we went to May and June, and they were worried about their process. So I'm sorry if I misled people. I just wanted to capture that feel that we really didn't jump up a lot from the previous year when all things are considered.
Okay.
And I can pull that out for a future thing and do it differently. That's certainly.
Yeah, and we can talk offline. I just want to understand that a little bit better. And I just would like for a moment to address, Ms. Morris in her public comment and her budget comment made a comment about how can our budget be higher if we have 200 fewer students? And that's, I mean, illogical at best. It's not like these 200 students are all sitting in the same classrooms and it means, we need 20 fewer classroom teachers. That's 200 students spread out across an entire district. It could be, one student from every classroom that's lost. It's not like we need fewer teachers. And it's also, not only do we not need fewer teachers and fewer staff in general, but we have contractual obligations for salaries and salary increases for all of our staff. So, 200 fewer students does not equal 20 fewer teachers or fewer salaries or, fewer buildings to run or floors to clean or mouths to feed in general. I mean, 200 kids does not make or break, a budget. So it's illogical to think that a budget would of this size and this nature and calculated in this way would go down because of a decrease of 200 students. That's so, and I hear what everyone's saying, and believe me, student mental health is certainly one of my highest priorities. I just don't know how we can consider adding, just as I'm not saying we can subtract staff. I just don't know how we can add staff when we're looking at, pandemic costs and extra, as it is, putting extra bodies in buildings. And I would love to be able to say we can do that, and we'll certainly keep that as the consideration going forward. I just can't imagine right now how that will be possible. I think, we're in luck that there might be less of an increase in healthcare costs and a few other things and a few savings, but it's going to be a tight year again, going into both towns with these increases. Phil Morris, you want to try again?
Okay, can you hear me this time?
Yes, very good.
I had to change microphones. microphone that I had on my webcam. Well, the webcam's not working, so all you get is my fake hand and my giant letter. But I can hear, I've been able to hear everybody and see everybody, so I don't know what the problem is. The webcam was working yesterday. My question relating to the budget is that try to hang on to from Mass Association of School Committees and other associations as to what the needs are for mental health and education. And I listen to the governor's reports and get the summaries. But I also know that we're supposed to be getting various forms of additional federal aid or federal assistance. Have you, from your, I'm not able to tell whether it's coming in the form of direct assistance or in the form of block grants from Carol and Ken's sources. When they finally derive the pandemic COVID budget for distribution, is that money going to come in a direct form, or will it be filtered through state recommendations first? End of question.
Okay.
The challenge we're facing, I think, is the answer somewhat is yes. For instance, that the ESSER money, the ESSER money. However, we want to make sure if Title I drops 70 to 80,000 and those other grants don't compensate for that, to give you a net answer right now, Phil, but that's the dilemma. I think we'll have it handled very soon, a couple of weeks, but I also worry because there are veterans on this committee who know agencies at the state or federal level have promised resources, and then at the end of the day, it didn't quite always play that way. So, you know, we'll have to take some calculated risks. But I think the answer to your question is we'll have much better information in the next few weeks. Because I know we eventually have to come up with a budget that we do bring forward. But I'd rather have as much information as possible. And again, are we looking at a multi-year approach or sort of a one-year approach?
Thanks. I agree with your I'm not surprised by the answer, but I keep hoping for sunrise to actually shine its down rather than going through the clouds of pain and disagreements with funding. Our revenue sources are instability due to the COVID presence, and I really appreciate our student members speaking to the mental health, because while I have 5 grandchildren in other districts, I hear their parents and their community saying the same thing. And that's in one family's in Massachusetts, one's in California. It's a national problem, individual school districts facing it. And the best to all the students who sometimes don't have the easy access that they used to have. So anyway, best to all of us.
If I could add to Phil's, the answer to Phil's question, one of the things that is really important to remember, so much has happened with the pandemic that we sometimes lose sight of where we were before it all started. One of the reasons for the Student Opportunity Act is that the state realized they had a committee that for several years studied the foundation budget. And they realized that the foundation budget was not adequate to do what schools were being asked to do in this day and age. This is pre-COVID. So they put together a plan, I believe it was at the time a 7-year plan, to increase monies to school districts. And however, they didn't want to just add it to the Chapter 70 money that they usually give you, because they don't want it to just get, I don't know, picked up by, let's say, more electricity costs or whatever. They wanted to see what districts' plans would be if they gave them the money. And so that's why the Student Opportunity Act, it was supposed to be in this current year's budget, but with everything that happened with the pandemic, it got put on hold. But there seems to be a commitment to making sure that they live up to the promise that they made when it came to that money. And so I believe that there's even talk about, it was supposed to be a 7-year roll-in, that maybe they may shorten it to a 6-year, I don't know. There's some talk about that at the state level right now, and maybe when we talk to our reps and our senator, we can find out more. But that's what the Student Opportunity Act was all about. So that 300 and I think it was, I don't know, 325,000 off the top of my head. I think it's a little more than that, but that money that we presented on a few weeks ago, and why we had to make a plan for the money. And I don't know if you were there that night, Tynan, but I think you were. And we talked about a certain amount of that being set aside. I think it was $225,000 for mental health services, because that's one of the priorities for our state. Our commissioner, when Mr. Jenks and I have meetings with the Commissioner of Education, we hear often him talking about how important student mental health is. And we know from our own experiences right here at Dennis-Yarmouth that some of our students are struggling, and we need more services in those areas. So hopefully those monies will come through, because they are, in a sense, earmarked for those kinds of services. Now, 6 years from now, will the district be in the same place as it is the year post-pandemic? Maybe not. And maybe the priorities will change and things will be different. So that's one of the reasons why keeping it in a grant versus it right in the budget, it can get lost. $325,000 in a $64 million budget can be, absorbed easily. So the legislature wants to make sure that we are addressing those priority needs that they know and we know our students have, and not just here's a little bit more money added to your budget. So I want you guys to know we take that seriously. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. All right, one final comment, Joe Tierney, and then I'm going to close the public hearing and move on to reports. So, Joe?
Jenny, I just had a timeline question. I think we have one more pass at this, I believe on the 22nd.
Yes.
Before we have to go on the 8th of March. So we hopefully by then, Ken, you'll have more information, just because that 4.62 number is kind of still a big number. And I understand you don't have the everything tight, but I'm hoping by the 22nd we have a little better idea. But I just want to make sure we knew that, and that's true, that we'll still have one more look at it before then. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. That will end the public hearing on the budget. And now we will move on to reports. First report is from our student representatives. And I don't know if it's one or both of you, but feel free, both of you.
I'll just be mainly speaking today. So obviously we have a new member, Grace Leppan, who is extremely well spoken, as you saw earlier. From last meeting, when the decision for 2 student representatives was approved, I instantly started working quickly, and we chose the junior student representative by the school. And a little history of Grace: throughout her high school career so far, she has excelled in student advocacy and has truly been a voice for those who need it in our school. So it's an extreme pleasure to have Grace in the school committee, so welcome, Grace. Also, some logistics: winter sports and activities are still happening, still staying safe. Third term has started, and the community and the school is also taking all the precautions to stay safe and be at home when needed. So we're doing a phenomenal job with that. I don't know if you guys know, but a couple of days ago, Yarmouth moved from the red zone to the yellow zone. So that's a phenomenal, news. Also, some big news: the Visual Arts Department Chair, Mrs. DeRocha, is planning a mural in the high school library, and a 9th grader by the name of Jacob Joy emailed me this today, which I thought was absolutely amazing. Quote, "This is a mural that that is going to be put on the wall where the computer lab is in the library." The mural itself will be around 200 boxes with avatars resembling Zoom avatars. In each box, there will be an abstract art piece that will use color and abstract shapes to show the diversity in students like their race, color, ethnicity, national origin, religion, disability, sex, gender expression or identity, sexual orientation, and personal/creative expression, end quote. So that is happening with the art department. And I think it's an amazing deal and incredible. And also, last but certainly not least, that there's going to be a second semester open house this Thursday from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. at the high school. And it's going to be virtual, obviously. And Grace can go off.
First of all, thank you so much, Tynan, for that welcome. That was very kind. Something that has just recently popped up, Elena Rooney has started a new club, and I believe she presented it to the school committee. It's called Girl Up. What it is actually a national organization founded in Washington, D.C., I believe, and she created her own chapter of it here. What we'll be doing is, I'm sorry, I should probably say that I joined the club as well. And what we shall be doing is raising money through different fundraising activities, no matter what they may be. We actually just had a brainstorming session today for both local charities and organizations, as well as international, especially the ones that the founder of this organization has decided to dedicate the month to. Like each month she decides like, okay, so we're going to be raising money for this foundation. I believe they just donated a few thousand bikes down to Guatemala for the women to be able to travel safer, both to school, to work, and to home.
What was the name of that club?
Girl Up.
Girl Up. Thank you very much. Welcome. We're glad to have you. Next report is from our liaisons to the boards of selectmen. I think, Jennifer, you attended Dennis? Oh, sorry, you're muted. I must have clicked it at the same time.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. Yes. So last Tuesday, the 2nd, I attended the Dennis Select Board meeting, and both the Technical High School, Cape Cod Technical High School, and DY Regional District presented their budgets for the fiscal year for the next fiscal year, excuse me. So that's pretty much that's all that has to be reported. There wasn't much feedback on either one. Just one select board member asked for a little bit more information on the slides, just a deeper dive into some of the numbers. And Assistant Superintendent Jakes just said that, you know, he had sent that in a separate email to them. He just sent a condensed version for the presentation for the select board, but they did have that information that they were seeking. So that's pretty much all.
Thank you very much. Is there a report for the Yarmouth board? Joe Glenn?
Yeah, the Yarmouth Select Board went over their warrants for their town meeting, and they finalized those. There was kind of a dual community conversation about both golf and the DYH wastewater issue. So it does kind of cover both Dennis and Yarmouth. And there was a golf public hearing on the golf rates, but there was conversation there. There was a placeholder that was in regards to DY. I want to say it had to do with the regional agreement, but I guess it was withdrawn. So there was, you know, there's the regular placeholder on our budget. But those issues in regards to Dennis and Yarmouth took up a lot of the information. And of course, there was finance in their budget issue talk, which obviously is pertinent to what we're talking about. So hopefully that we can get that the school committee can get in front of them for the next report. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Is there a building committee report?
Thanks, Jenny. I don't have anything. We haven't had a meeting since our last school committee meeting, but I don't know if Ken has an update on something. I don't know if that was in the next section for bonding and funding.
Yeah, I think that's in the next.
Yeah,
that's in his report.
That's all I have is just his information there. But we're you
Okay.
know, the building is still continuing on. You know, our project managers are working, you know, to try to get bids collected, get everything done, and get it ready. So it's still moving, even though you don't see a lot of action and a lot of meetings and whatnot happening. It's still going on. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. All right, so that's a nice segue right into the assistant superintendent's report, please.
Yes, and in the packet, there's a letter for the initial bond, the notes. If you remember, Lynn Welsh from Unibank was, I believe, at the previous meeting to walk through. This is the process that follows. And this evening, we're asking the next step you have to follow in this process would be solicit bids on February 16th by Unibank for borrowing that $38,562,540. This is a standard procedure as part of the process. In some respects, this is a great time to be going out for these kind of borrowings, because right now the money people predicted it would take because of interest rates where they are. There are some projects where people have saved substantial money on the projects, and we're hopeful will fall into that realm as well. This evening, again, as Lynn had explained last time, to move forward this evening, need the committee to vote to solicit those bids for that amount. And then on the 22nd, we'll be bringing back, this is the recommended group that gave the group of banks that gave the district the best deal for the borrowing. And then we'd formally approve the borrowing after that evening, because you know who the vendor is and what the interest rate is.
Okay, so there was a motion as presented in your memo about the borrowing. I'd entertain that motion now, if anyone.
I move the school
Joe.
committee authorize and approve the solicitation of bids of February 16, 2021 by Unibank for borrowing of $38,562,540 for the construction.
All right.
Second.
Jim froze up there a little bit, but motion was made and seconded. Further discussion on the motion. Indicate, raise your hand. School committee members, questions, comments. All right, we'll do a roll call vote on this, please. Jim Dykeman,
Yes.
Jennifer Rose,
Yes.
Joe Tierney,
Yes.
Zane Fitzgerald,
Yes.
Phil Morris,
Yes.
Joe Glynn,
Yes.
Jenny Landers votes yes, so unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you for that, Ken. And did you have anything else in your report tonight? Okay, great. All right, so consent agenda.
Sorry, my memory's not what it used to be. I promised someone I would mention kindergarten registration, which doesn't sound like it's connected to building a new school. But anyway, kindergarten registration's going on. Go online. It's a very good streamlined process now. And so please, if you're interested in registering for kindergarten, get your children registered so we know what our numbers are like for next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a guest with me from the school committee meeting tonight.
My mother needs a motivation hug.
Okay, goodbye. Thank you, kindergarten registration. Oh, and I also wanted to mention that I saw on Facebook this week the photos of all the artwork by DY students that placed, and also honorable mentions. If you're not on Facebook, ask someone to show it to you. They are incredible, incredible sculpture and all kinds of 3D work. by DY students. Amazing.
And I've asked, Madam Chair, I've asked the art teachers, they've sent me pictures of the artwork and I've put them in a PowerPoint. So I've invited the students to come on March 5th or whatever the first March
Oh,
meeting,
great.
school committee. And just to say a little bit about each of their works, because we haven't had a lot of happy joy with our kids recently. And we'd love to see that. I mean, the gold keys, silver keys, honorable mentions. You know, DY is great in the arts. So thank you for mentioning that.
Great. I'd love to see that. Thank you. So tonight on the consent agenda, we have a donation of masks and gloves to DY from Ms. Anna Cobb of the Hyannis Old Navy store, and a donation of flat file drawer cabinets to the DY Maintenance Department from Mr. Edward Rouse of East Providence. Thank you for those generous donations. And then we also have the minutes of the January 25th meeting. Would anyone move the consent agenda?
Move the consent agenda.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Thank you very much. Bills, requisitions, calendar enclosure. We'll have a public comment period. We have a little bit more time allotted tonight. We can go to 8:30 if needed, depending on what we have for public comment. Each person will be allowed to speak for up to 3 minutes. This is your opportunity to address items on the agenda, items within the purview of the school committee. This is not a question and answer session. We will direct you to the right person to get your questions answered. Is there anyone from the public that would like to address the committee? Please raise your hand and I will unmute you so you can address the committee. I don't see any hands raised. Going once. Twice. Looks like there's no public comment tonight, so that is all we have for the evening.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a good night.
Bye.